Behind the golden gates of the most powerful monarchy in the world, a family feud threatens to tear apart centuries of tradition. When personal grievances collide with royal duty, even kings must choose between pride and family. This Christmas season, the palace walls echo with whispered conversations and unspoken tensions that could reshape the very foundation of the royal family forever. What happens when the crown's weight becomes too heavy for even the strongest shoulders to bear, and when does protecting one's legacy mean sacrificing the people you love most? The morning frost clung to the windows of Clarence's house like delicate lace, creating intricate patterns that seemed to mirror the complex web of relationships within the royal family. King Charles sat in his private study, the weight of recent decisions pressing heavily on his shoulders as he reviewed the stack of correspondence that had accumulated overnight. The ornate clock on his mahogany desk chimed 8 times, marking another hour in what had become the most challenging period of his reign. The previous evening's telephone calls still echoed in his mind. Catherine's voice had carried a mixture of hope and desperation as she extended what everyone knew would be her final invitation to the Christmas charity event she had organized for underprivileged children across London. The Princess of Wales had poured her heart into this project, working tirelessly for months to create something meaningful that would bring joy to families who had little reason to celebrate during the holiday season. "Your Majesty," she had said, her voice steady despite the underlying emotion, "I understand there have been difficulties, but this isn't about us. These children have been looking forward to meeting you. Some of them have written letters, drawn pictures. They believe in the magic of Christmas and the kindness of their king." Charles had listened in silence, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that had become his constant companion since the rift in the family had begun to widen. The irony wasn't lost on him that the woman who had once been welcomed so warmly into their family, who had brought such joy to his son and grandchildren, was now at the center of a controversy that threatened to overshadow everything they had built together. The king's private secretary, James Morrison, knocked gently on the door before entering. A man of impeccable discretion who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, Morrison had witnessed many family dramas, but none quite like this one. His expression was carefully neutral as he approached the desk, carrying a leather portfolio that Charles recognized contained the day's most sensitive correspondence. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Morrison said, his voice carrying the perfect balance of respect and familiarity that came from years of faithful service. "I have the responses from the palace communications team regarding the Princess of Wales event, as well as the latest reports from our security detail." Charles gestured for Morrison to sit in the chair across from his desk, a departure from the usual formal protocol that spoke to the gravity of their current situation. The king had always prided himself on maintaining proper royal protocol, but recent events had forced him to acknowledge that sometimes the most important conversations happened when the rigid structure of monarchy was temporarily set aside. "Tell me honestly, James," Charles said, removing his reading glasses and setting them carefully on the desk. "In all your years of service, have you ever seen the family navigate anything quite like this?" Morrison considered his words carefully before responding. "Your Majesty, every generation of the royal family has faced its share of challenges. Your grandmother dealt with the abdication crisis, your mother navigated the complexities of a changing world while maintaining tradition. But, I must say, the current situation presents unique difficulties because it involves not just personal relationships, but public perception and the very future of how the monarchy connects with the people." The weight of Morrison's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Charles stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens where he had once played with his own children, where William and Harry had chased each other through the maze of hedges, their laughter filling the air with the kind of innocent joy that seemed impossibly distant now. The genesis of the current crisis lay in a series of misunderstandings and miscommunications that had spiraled far beyond anyone's expectations. It had started with a disagreement over the handling of certain royal duties, evolved into questions about loyalty and respect, and had ultimately crystallized around Catherine's Christmas event. What should have been a simple matter of family support had become a symbolic battleground where pride, tradition, and personal feelings clashed with devastating effect. Charles remembered the early days when Catherine had first joined the family, how seamlessly she had adapted to royal life while maintaining her own sense of authenticity. She had brought a fresh perspective to their work, connecting with people in ways that felt both natural and powerful. Her Christmas event was a perfect example of this approach, combining traditional royal charity work with a modern understanding of what families needed most during difficult times. The event was scheduled to take place at the historic Guildhall in the City of London, a venue that had hosted royal celebrations for centuries. Catherine had personally selected activities that would create lasting memories for the children: a traditional Christmas puppet show, carol singing, gift exchanges, and a special tea service where each child would be treated like visiting royalty themselves. Local bakeries had donated elaborate cakes, musicians had volunteered their time, and even the Lord Mayor of London had rearranged his schedule to attend. But what made the event truly special was Catherine's vision of having the entire royal family present, creating a sense of warmth and unity that would reassure the public during uncertain times. She had imagined the king engaging with the children, sharing stories and, perhaps even joining in their games. The photographs and memories created that day would have reinforced the monarchy's role as a source of comfort and continuity for the British people. Morrison cleared his throat gently, drawing Charles back from his contemplations. "Your Majesty, there is also the matter of the international guests who were planning to attend. The ambassador from France specifically mentioned how much his grandchildren were looking forward to meeting you. The charitable organizations involved have indicated that your presence would significantly increase their ability to raise funds for future programs." Charles nodded, understanding the broader implications of his decision. Royal appearances weren't just personal choices, they carried political, diplomatic, and social weight that extended far beyond the immediate event. His absence would be noticed, analyzed, and interpreted by everyone from foreign dignitaries to ordinary citizens who looked to the royal family for stability and leadership. The morning sun had risen higher, casting long shadows across the study and illuminating the portraits of previous monarchs that lined the walls. Charles often found comfort in these images of his predecessors, men and women who had faced their own impossible choices while trying to balance personal desires with royal duty. But, today, their painted eyes seemed to regard him with a mixture of sympathy and expectation that only added to his burden. A gentle knock on the door interrupted his thoughts, and Morrison rose to answer it. Charles's private chef entered with a silver tray containing his usual morning tea and a selection of newspapers. The king accepted the tea gratefully but gestured for the newspapers to be placed on a side table. He had learned that reading the daily coverage of royal affairs first thing in the morning often colored his entire day with unnecessary stress and anxiety. "Your Majesty," the chef said quietly, "Cook wanted me to mention that she's prepared your favorite Christmas biscuits for the household staff party tomorrow. She was hoping you might be able to stop by the kitchens to thank the team personally, as is tradition." Charles smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth he had shown all morning. The annual household staff celebration was one of his favorite royal traditions, a time when the formal barriers between the royal family and those who served them were temporarily lowered in favor of shared humanity and gratitude. "Of course, please tell Cook I'll be delighted to join you all. And thank her for thinking of the biscuits, she knows they're my weakness." After the chef departed, Charles found himself thinking about the nature of tradition and change within the royal family. Some traditions, like the staff Christmas party, felt timeless and essential because they honored the relationships and dedication that made royal life possible. Others, like the complex protocols surrounding public disagreements, sometimes seemed to create more problems than they solved. The telephone on his desk rang, its sharp tone cutting through the morning quiet. Morrison answered with his usual professional courtesy, speaking in low tones for several minutes before hanging up and turning to face the king with an expression of barely concealed concern. "That was the Princess of Wales' private secretary," Morrison said carefully. "They wanted to confirm the final guest list for tomorrow evening's event. Apparently, several major donors have specifically asked whether Your Majesty will be in attendance, and the uncertainty is beginning to affect the fundraising goals for the children's charities involved." Charles set down his teacup with a slight tremor in his hand. The practical implications of his personal decision were becoming impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about family dynamics anymore. Real children from struggling families would be directly affected by the success or failure of Catherine's charitable work. The money raised at this event would fund programs throughout the coming year, providing everything from warm winter clothing to educational opportunities for families who had few other resources. "How much are we talking about, James?" Charles asked, though he suspected he didn't want to hear the answer. Morrison consulted his notes. "The preliminary estimates suggest that your attendance could increase the evening's fundraising by approximately 40%. Several corporate sponsors have indicated they would significantly increase their contributions if they could guarantee their executives would have the opportunity to meet with Your Majesty personally. The numbers hit Charles like a physical blow. 40% represented thousands of pounds that could change the lives of vulnerable children during the coldest, most expensive time of year. His absence would literally leave children colder and hungrier, a thought that went against every principle he held dear about the responsibilities of kingship. Charles moved to his bookshelf, running his fingers along the leather spines of volumes that had provided him with guidance throughout his life. His hand stopped at a well-worn copy of Constitutional History, a book that had helped him understand the delicate balance between personal autonomy and royal duty that every monarch must navigate. But all the historical precedents in the world couldn't make this decision easier. "What does William think?" Charles asked, the question slipping out before he could stop himself. Morrison's pause was almost imperceptible, but Charles caught it. "His Royal Highness has not officially commented on the matter, Your Majesty. However, his office has confirmed his attendance at the princess's event, along with the children." The implication was clear. William would be there, supporting his wife and honoring his commitments to the charitable organizations involved. The future king was choosing family unity over whatever personal grievances might exist, a decision that would inevitably be compared to Charles's own choice. The photographs from the event would tell a story about the royal family's priorities and values, with William and Catherine representing the future of the monarchy while Charles's absence spoke volumes about the past. As the morning progressed, Charles found himself remembering Christmas celebrations from years past. He recalled the joy on his grandchildren's faces as they opened presents, the warmth of family gatherings where love overcame any temporary disagreements, and the profound satisfaction he felt when royal duties aligned perfectly with personal values. Those moments seemed precious and fragile now, like ornaments that had been carefully preserved for decades only to risk shattering at the slightest touch. Morrison busied himself with organizing papers, but Charles could sense his longtime aide's internal struggle. The private secretary had served multiple members of the royal family with unwavering loyalty, but situations like this tested even the most dedicated staff members' ability to remain neutral. Everyone in the palace had opinions about what should happen, but only Charles could make the final decision. The weight of kingship had never felt heavier than it did in this moment, sitting in the comfortable familiarity of his study while grappling with a choice that would reverberate through his family and his reign for years to come. Outside, London was waking up to another day of ordinary challenges and small joys, unaware that their king was wrestling with a decision that would define not just this Christmas season, but the very nature of what the royal family represented to the world. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Clarence House as King Charles prepared for what he knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of his reign. He had requested a private meeting with his son William, hoping that a father-to-son discussion might provide clarity where formal protocol had failed. The Prince of Wales arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, his bearing reflecting the careful balance between royal dignity and personal tension that had become characteristic of their recent interactions. William entered the study with the measured steps of someone who had learned to navigate delicate family situations under the constant scrutiny of public attention. His face bore the strain of recent weeks, but his eyes held the determination that Charles recognized as inherited from generations of monarchs who had faced impossible choices. Father and son embraced briefly, a gesture that felt both natural and laden with the weight of unspoken grievances. "Please, sit," Charles said, gesturing toward the comfortable chairs near the fireplace rather than the formal seating arrangement typically used for official meetings. The fire crackled softly, providing a backdrop of warmth that contrasted sharply with the emotional distance that had grown between them. William settled into his chair with the careful movements of someone who was choosing his words before speaking them. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet like this, Papa. I know these past few weeks haven't been easy for any of us." Charles nodded, studying his son's face and seeing traces of both Diana's compassion and his own stubborn commitment to principle. "I've been thinking a great deal about family, about duty, about what we owe to each other and to the people we serve. Your Catherine's event tomorrow evening represents everything I believe our family should stand for, and yet you're considering not attending because of pride," William finished quietly, his voice carrying no accusation, only the weary understanding of someone who had watched his family struggle with similar conflicts throughout his life. The directness of William's observation hung in the air between them like a challenge. Charles felt his defenses rising automatically, the lifelong habit of royal reserve asserting itself even in this private moment. But something in his son's expression, a mixture of love, disappointment, and desperate hope, made him pause before responding. "It's not about pride, William. It's about respect, about the fundamental principles that hold this family together. When those principles are challenged, when loyalty is questioned, sometimes a stand must be taken regardless of the personal cost." William leaned forward, his hands clasped together in a gesture that reminded Charles of the young boy who used to seek comfort after childhood disappointments. "But, Papa, what principles are we talking about here? Catherine organized this event to help children who have nothing. She's worked for months, coordinating with dozens of charities, arranging for musicians and entertainers to donate their time. The only principle I see being challenged is the one that says our personal disagreements matter more than our duty to serve others." The words stung because they carried the uncomfortable ring of truth. Charles rose and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where the winter afternoon was beginning to fade into evening. The bare branches of ancient trees reached toward a gray sky, their stark beauty somehow reflecting his own emotional state. "You don't understand the full complexity of the situation," Charles said finally. "There are matters of protocol, questions of authority and respect that go beyond this single event. The monarchy depends on clear hierarchies and mutual understanding. When those are undermined, we become exactly what our critics say we are, an institution more concerned with ceremony than compassion," William interrupted, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself. "I'm sorry, but I've watched this family tear itself apart over issues that seem insignificant compared to the real challenges facing the people we're supposed to serve." Charles turned back to face his son, seeing in William's expression a passion for service that reminded him of his own younger self. There had been a time when Charles had believed he could change the monarchy from within, making it more relevant and responsive to contemporary needs. That idealism had been tested repeatedly over the decades, worn down by the relentless demands of tradition and protocol. "Your Catherine has indeed created something beautiful with this event," Charles said, his voice softening. "I've read the reports, seen the preparations. The children who will attend have been through hardships that most people their age should never experience. Some are refugees, others from families struggling with poverty or illness. For one evening, they'll be treated like the precious individuals they are." William's expression brightened slightly. "She's thought of everything, Papa. There's a special area where children can record video messages to send to relatives who couldn't be there. Local art students are helping the younger ones create ornaments they can take home. Even the menu was designed with input from nutritionists to ensure children with dietary restrictions could participate fully." The pride in William's voice was unmistakable, and Charles felt a pang of recognition. He remembered feeling the same way about Diana's charitable work in the early years of their marriage, the way she could transform royal duty into genuine human connection. Catherine seemed to possess that same gift, the ability to use her platform not for personal glory but to create meaningful change in people's lives. "The guest list is extraordinary as well," William continued. "Ambassadors from 12 different countries, representatives from every major children's charity in London, and business leaders who have committed to ongoing support for these organizations. Your presence would validate their work in ways that could sustain these programs for years to come." Charles returned to his chair, feeling the weight of his son's words. "And if I choose not to attend?" William was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as if seeking answers in its dancing flames. "Then, you'll have made a choice about what kind of king you want to be remembered as. History will note that when given the opportunity to put service above personal grievance, you chose differently." The harsh judgment in William's words was softened by the obvious pain with which he delivered them. This wasn't a son trying to wound his father, it was a future king grappling with the implications of his predecessor's decisions. Charles recognized the position William was in, caught between loyalty to his father and his wife, between respecting royal hierarchy and following his own moral compass. "There's something else you should know," William said quietly. "Catherine has been receiving letters from some of the children who will attend tomorrow. They're handwritten, Papa. 7-year-olds practicing their best penmanship to tell the king how excited they are to meet him. One little girl named Emma drew a picture of you wearing a crown made of Christmas stars. Charles closed his eyes, feeling the full impact of William's words. Children's letters had always been his weakness, their innocence and hope cutting through the layers of cynicism and calculation that surrounded royal life. He remembered his own children's drawings from decades past, the way they had seen him not as a king but simply as Papa, someone who could fix any problem and make any sadness disappear. "How many children will be there?" Charles asked, though he suspected the answer would make his decision even more difficult. 87, William replied immediately. Ages 5 to 15. Each one selected by charitable organizations because they represent families who rarely have reason to celebrate. For most of them, this will be the closest they ever come to experiencing the magic they see in fairy tales about kings and princesses. The specific number hit Charles with unexpected force. Not dozens or many but 87 individual children, each with their own story of struggle and hope. He tried to imagine their faces, their excitement, their inevitable disappointment if he failed to appear. The thought was almost unbearable. "William," Charles said slowly, "I need you to understand that this isn't just about one evening. The decisions we make now will set precedents for how this family handles disagreements in the future. If we ignore serious breaches of protocol simply because the consequences are unpleasant, what message does that send about the importance of royal standards?" William stood and moved to the bookshelf, his fingers trailing along the same volumes his father had touched earlier. "Perhaps it sends the message that we're human beings capable of forgiveness and growth, rather than marble statues trapped in poses that stopped making sense decades ago." The comparison was uncomfortably apt. Charles had often felt exactly like that, a statue posed in positions dictated by history and tradition, unable to move or change even when circumstances demanded flexibility. The monarchy's greatest strength, its continuity and stability, sometimes became its greatest weakness when rapid adaptation was required. "Your grandmother faced similar challenges," Charles said, referring to Queen Elizabeth II. "She managed to maintain royal dignity while adapting to changing times. Perhaps there are lessons in how she approached these decisions." William turned to face his father, his expression thoughtful. Grandmother's greatest strength was her ability to separate personal feelings from royal duty. When she disagreed with someone, she found ways to express the disagreement privately while still fulfilling her public obligations. She understood that the crown belonged to the people, not to whoever happened to wear it at any given moment. The observation was both respectful and pointed. Elizabeth II had indeed mastered the art of compartmentalization, attending events and performing duties even when personal relationships were strained. Her Christmas broadcasts had always emphasized unity and service, values she embodied even during the most difficult periods of her reign. A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Morrison entered with a tea service, setting it carefully on the table between father and son. The simple ritual of preparing and serving tea provided a moment of normalcy, a reminder that beneath the weight of crowns and constitutions, they were still a family sharing an afternoon conversation. "James," Charles said as Morrison prepared to leave, "what time does the princess's event begin tomorrow evening?" 6 o'clock, Your Majesty. The children's program runs from 6 to 8, followed by the adult reception until 10. Security has indicated that your arrival could be accommodated at any point during the evening, should you choose to attend. After Morrison left, father and son sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. The tea was perfectly prepared, warm and comforting, but neither seemed particularly interested in it. The fire continued to crackle, its warmth unable to penetrate the chill of uncertainty that filled the room. "There's one more thing," William said finally. "Catherine asked me not to mention this, but I think you should know. She's been having trouble sleeping lately, worrying about whether she's somehow caused this rift in our family. She keeps wondering if she should have handled things differently, if there was something she could have done to prevent this situation." The revelation hit Charles like a physical blow. He had been so focused on his own sense of being wrong that he hadn't fully considered how Catherine might be experiencing this conflict. She was still relatively new to the family, still learning to navigate the complex dynamics of royal relationships. The thought that she was blaming herself for circumstances largely beyond her control filled him with unexpected guilt. "She shouldn't feel responsible," Charles said quietly. This situation has roots that go back long before her arrival in our family." William nodded. "I've told her the same thing, but, you know, Catherine. She has this tremendous sense of responsibility for everyone around her. It's part of what makes her so effective in her charitable work, but it also means she carries burdens that aren't really hers to bear." The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the study. Charles found himself thinking about the nature of family, about the ways love and duty could either support each other or come into destructive conflict. His own parents had faced similar challenges, navigating the demands of monarchy while trying to maintain authentic human relationships. "What would you do, William? If you were in my position, facing this same choice?" William considered the question carefully before answering. "I would ask myself what kind of legacy I wanted to leave, not just as a king but as a father and grandfather. I would think about the children who wrote those letters, but I would also think about my own grandchildren and what I wanted them to learn about forgiveness and priorities." The weight of future generations pressed down on Charles as he contemplated his son's words. His grandchildren would indeed remember this Christmas, and they would form their understanding of family loyalty and royal responsibility based partly on the choices he made in the coming hours. As William prepared to leave, he turned back to his father with an expression of profound sadness mixed with hope. "Papa, I love you. I respect the impossible position you're in, and I understand that being king means making decisions that ordinary people never have to face. But I also love my wife, and I believe in the work she's trying to do. Tomorrow evening, I'll be there supporting her and celebrating with those children, not because protocol demands it but because it's the right thing to do." After William left, Charles remained in his study as darkness settled over London. The weight of his decision felt heavier than ever, but, for the first time in weeks, he was beginning to see a path forward that might honor both his royal responsibilities and his family relationships. The evening of the Christmas event arrived with a crisp December wind that seemed to carry both promise and uncertainty through the streets of London. At the historic Guildhall, Catherine's team of coordinators moved with practiced efficiency, transforming the ancient halls into a wonderland that would have impressed even the most demanding royal event planner. Golden lights twinkled from every archway, while enormous Christmas trees stood sentinel at the entrances, their branches heavy with ornaments crafted by local school children. Catherine herself arrived 2 hours before the scheduled start time, her usual composure masking the anxiety that had kept her awake for most of the previous night. She moved through the venue with characteristic attention to detail, adjusting flower arrangements that were already perfect and checking sound equipment that had been tested multiple times. Her staff had learned to recognize these moments when the princess needed to channel nervous energy into productive activity. "Your Royal Highness," called Sarah Mitchell, Catherine's private secretary and closest confidant among the palace staff. "The musicians have arrived for their sound check, and the catering team confirms everything is ready for the children's tea service. We're also receiving final confirmations from several last-minute distinguished guests." Catherine paused in her inspection of the children's activity tables, her hands automatically smoothing an already pristine tablecloth. "Any word from Clarence House?" she asked quietly, the question she had been avoiding all afternoon finally spoken aloud. Sarah's expression grew carefully neutral. "Nothing official, ma'am. However, security did mention that additional preparations have been made for potential high-profile arrivals throughout the evening." The diplomatic phrasing couldn't hide the uncertainty that hung over the event like an elegant sword of Damocles. Catherine had planned every detail assuming King Charles would attend, from the seating arrangements that included a special chair for him at the children's storytelling circle to the menu selections that featured his known preferences. His absence would create both practical and symbolic gaps that no amount of last-minute reorganization could fully address. The first guests began arriving precisely at 6 o'clock, their faces bright with the anticipation that characterized special occasions. The children came with their families or group leaders from various charitable organizations, many wearing their finest clothes saved especially for important events. Catherine watched from a balcony overlooking the main hall as 87 young people entered what many of them would later describe as the most magical evening of their lives. Among the early arrivals was 9-year-old Marcus Thompson, whose family had been supported by one of Catherine's partner charities after his father lost his job due to illness. Marcus clutched a handmade thank you card in his small hands, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the grandeur of his surroundings. His mother, Janet, struggled to hold back tears as she watched her son experience something she had never been able to provide for him. "Mummy, look!" Marcus whispered urgently, pointing to the elaborate ceiling decorations. "It's like the palace in my storybook." Janet squeezed her son's hand, remembering the night she had read him fairy tales about brave princes and kind kings while wondering how they would afford heating for another month. Tonight, those stories seemed to come alive around them, transforming struggle into celebration and scarcity into abundance. Catherine descended from the balcony to mingle with the guests, her natural warmth immediately evident as she knelt to speak with children at eye level and listened intently to their excited chatter. She had a gift for making each person feel like the most important guest at any gathering, a quality that transformed formal royal duties into genuine human connections. "Your Royal Highness," came a small voice from beside her skirts. Catherine looked down to see Emma Richardson, the 7-year-old who had drawn the picture of King Charles wearing a crown of Christmas stars. Emma held out her artwork with shy pride, her cheeks flushed with excitement and nervous energy. "This is absolutely beautiful, Emma," Catherine said, accepting the drawing with the solemnity typically reserved for state gifts. "His Majesty will treasure this. You've captured his kindness perfectly." Emma beamed with pleasure, but, then, her expression grew uncertain. "Will the king really come tonight? My gran said sometimes important people are too busy for little people like us." The innocent question struck Catherine like a physical blow. She glanced around the room, noting the other children who were scanning the crowd with similar hopeful expressions, and felt the full weight of her impossible position. How could she explain to a 7-year-old that adult disagreements sometimes overshadowed the magic of Christmas and the importance of keeping promises? "The king cares very much about children like you," Catherine said carefully, her training in diplomatic language serving her well. "He thinks about you often and wants you to have a wonderful evening regardless of whether he can join us tonight." Prince William appeared at Catherine's side as if summoned by telepathy, his presence providing both support and a subtle reminder of who definitely would be there for these children. He carried himself with the easy confidence that came from years of royal engagements, but Catherine could see the tension around his eyes that spoke to the emotional complexity of the evening. "Ladies and gentlemen," William announced, his voice carrying easily across the great hall, "if I could have your attention, please. My wife and I want to welcome you all to what we hope will be a truly magical evening. We have some wonderful surprises planned, starting with a special puppet show that tells the story of Christmas through the eyes of children from around the world." The children gathered around a small stage that had been erected near the main fireplace, their faces glowing with anticipation. The puppet show began with traditional carols but quickly evolved into an interactive adventure where the young audience helped the characters solve problems and spread Christmas cheer. Catherine watched from the side, her heart swelling with pride at how perfectly her vision was being realized. As the puppet show concluded, the children moved to various activity stations that had been set up throughout the hall. There were ornament-making tables supervised by art students from local colleges, a letter-writing station where children could compose messages to Father Christmas, and a storytelling circle where volunteer actors read classic Christmas tales with theatrical flair. The adult guests began arriving around 7 o'clock, their evening wear and formal decorations creating an elegant backdrop for the continuing children's activities. Among them were ambassadors from 12 different countries, each having accepted Catherine's invitation partly out of diplomatic courtesy but increasingly out of genuine interest in her charitable work. Ambassador Laurent Dubois from France approached Catherine during a brief lull in the children's programming. "Your Royal Highness, this evening exceeds even my highest expectations. My grandchildren in Paris would be green with envy if they could see these activities. I understand His Majesty the King was instrumental in inspiring this type of charitable approach?" Catherine's smile remained perfectly composed despite the awkward nature of the question. His Majesty has always been a champion of charitable work that brings real benefit to families in need. This evening represents values that the entire royal family holds dear. The diplomatic response satisfied the ambassador while carefully avoiding any direct reference to Charles's absence. Catherine had become expert at such conversational navigation, but each exchange reminded her of the questions she would inevitably face from the press and public in the coming days. At 7:30, just as the children were gathering for the evening's main event, a special Christmas tea where each child would be served by volunteer servers dressed as characters from classic holiday stories. A subtle commotion near the main entrance caught Catherine's attention. Security personnel moved with the heightened awareness that typically accompanied high-profile arrivals, and she felt her heart rate increase with sudden, impossible hope. Morrison appeared at Catherine's side, his expression carefully controlled but his eyes bright with something that might have been relief or excitement. "Your Royal Highness," he said quietly, "I believe you may want to greet the latest arrival personally." Catherine followed Morrison's gaze toward the main entrance, where the familiar figure of King Charles appeared, removing his overcoat and adjusting the formal decorations that marked this as an official royal appearance. He moved with the measured dignity that characterized all his public appearances, but Catherine caught something in his expression, a mixture of determination and nervous energy, that suggested this decision had not come easily. The children noticed first, their excited whispers building to a crescendo of recognition and joy. "It's the king! The Real King!" Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the hall and causing every adult head to turn toward the entrance. Charles's face broke into a genuine smile as he took in the scene of carefully organized chaos and childhood wonder that surrounded him. Catherine moved toward Charles with her heart hammering against her ribs, uncertain of what this moment would bring but grateful beyond words that he had chosen to come. They met in the center of the hall, the eyes of every guest upon them as they navigated this delicate reunion under the most public possible circumstances. "Your Majesty," Catherine said with a deep curtsy that was both formally correct and genuinely respectful. "We are honored by your presence this evening." Charles took her hand and raised her gently, his own voice warm with emotion as he replied, "My dear Catherine, the honor is entirely mine. I understand there are some young people here who have been waiting to meet me." The formal exchange satisfied protocol while managing to convey a sense of family reconciliation that sent a ripple of relief through the assembled guests. Whatever private disagreements had caused Charles's initial reluctance, his presence tonight represented a choice to prioritize public duty and family unity over personal grievances. Emma Richardson approached the king with her drawing clutched in her hands, her grandmother having given her the gentle push needed to overcome her shyness. "Your Majesty," she said in her clear young voice, "I made this picture for you. It's you wearing a crown made of Christmas stars." Charles knelt down to Emma's level, accepting the drawing with the solemnity it deserved. "This is the most beautiful crown I have ever seen," he said seriously. "May I ask what made you think of Christmas stars?" "Because you're like the star that guided the wise men," Emma replied with the matter-of-fact wisdom that sometimes emerged from children. "You help people find their way to good things." The simplicity of Emma's explanation seemed to strike Charles profoundly. He studied the drawing for a long moment, his expression softening in a way that reminded Catherine of the grandfather she had often observed with his own family. This was why she had fought so hard for this event, not for personal recognition or family harmony, but for moments like this where the monarchy's true purpose became crystal clear. As the evening continued, Charles moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of decades of royal engagements, but there was something different about his interactions tonight. He seemed more present, more engaged, as if Emma's words had reminded him of something fundamental about his role and responsibilities. The children's Christmas tea proceeded flawlessly, with Charles taking a place at the high table alongside William and Catherine, the three of them presenting a united front that spoke to the enduring strength of their family bonds. Photographers captured images that would grace newspaper front pages for days to come, but, more importantly, 87 children experienced an evening of pure magic that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the children's portion of the event concluded and they departed with their families, clutching personalized gift bags and memories that would last a lifetime, the adult reception began in earnest. Charles worked the room with Catherine at his side, their easy collaboration testament to the professional respect that had always existed between them, even during their most difficult personal moments. The fundraising portion of the evening exceeded all expectations, with Charles's presence inspiring exactly the level of corporate generosity that Catherine had hoped for. By the time the last guests departed near 10 o'clock, the events had raised enough money to fund expanded programs for vulnerable children throughout London for the entire following year. The morning after the Christmas event dawned with an unusual sense of calm settling over the royal household. The British press, predictably, had seized upon King Charles's last-minute appearance with typical theatrical enthusiasm, but, for once the coverage leaned decidedly positive. Headlines across major newspapers proclaimed variations of royal unity restored and Christmas magic brings family together, accompanied by photographs of Charles kneeling beside young Emma Richardson as she presented her hand-drawn crown of Christmas stars. In his private study at Clarence House, Charles sat reading the morning papers with something approaching satisfaction, a feeling that had been notably absent from his daily routine for several weeks. Morrison entered with the usual precision, carrying not just the daily briefings but also a stack of handwritten thank you notes that had already begun arriving from the previous evening's guests. "The response has been quite extraordinary, Your Majesty," Morrison reported, his typically reserved demeanor brightening with genuine pleasure. The French ambassador's office called first thing this morning to inquire about similar events that might be planned for the coming year. 3 different children's charities have requested meetings to discuss expanded partnerships, and the Lord Mayor's office has offered to host a follow-up event during the Easter season. Charles set down the newspaper he had been reading, his attention caught by the broader implications of Morrison's report. What had begun as a single evening of charitable activity was apparently generating momentum for sustained change, exactly the kind of meaningful impact that had always represented his highest aspirations for royal service. "And the children themselves?" Charles asked, remembering the bright faces and eager voices that had surrounded him throughout the previous evening. Morrison smiled, an expression rare enough to be noteworthy. "Perhaps this will illustrate better than my words could, Your Majesty." He handed Charles a small envelope addressed in careful 7-year-old handwriting to His Majesty King Charles, the nicest king in the world. Charles opened the envelope with gentle hands, extracting a folded piece of paper decorated with crayon drawings of Christmas trees and stars. The message, written in Emma Richardson's determined print, read, "Dear King Charles, thank you for coming to our party and being so kind to everyone. I hope you liked my picture. My mummy cried happy tears when we got home because she said you made me feel special. I think you have the kindest heart of any king ever. Love, Emma, age 7. The simple words struck Charles with unexpected power, cutting through decades of protocol and political calculation to reach the essential truth of what monarchy could mean to ordinary people. Emma's letter represented everything he had hoped to achieve when he first began developing his own vision of royal service, the ability to use privilege and position to create moments of genuine human connection and lasting positive impact. There are 17 more similar letters that arrived with the Morning Post, Morrison added quietly. Each child who attended last evening seems determined to express their gratitude personally. Charles carefully refolded Emma's letter, placing it in the desk drawer where he kept items of particular personal significance. I should respond to each one individually, he said, already envisioning the afternoon he would spend crafting replies that would honor the children's effort and enthusiasm. Your Majesty, Morrison continued, there is one additional matter that requires your attention. The Princess of Wales has requested a private meeting at your earliest convenience. Her private secretary indicated that she has some proposals regarding future charitable initiatives that she would like to discuss personally. The request marked a significant shift in the family dynamics that had been so strained in recent weeks. Catherine's decision to approach Charles directly, rather than working through William or other intermediaries, suggested a level of confidence in their restored relationship that felt both promising and slightly daunting. Please arrange for the princess to join me for tea this afternoon, Charles said. And, James, thank you for your patience and guidance throughout this difficult period. I know my indecision created complications for everyone involved. Morrison's response carried the warmth of genuine affection beneath its professional courtesy. Your Majesty, the most challenging decisions often require the most careful consideration. Yesterday evening demonstrated once again why your judgment, however, deliberate its formation, consistently serves the people well. After Morrison departed, Charles found himself reflecting on the transformation that had occurred over the previous 24 hours. The rift that had seemed so insurmountable just days earlier had somehow healed itself through the simple act of shared service to others. Perhaps this was the lesson that Emma's innocent wisdom had helped him rediscover, that the crown's true power lay not in maintaining dignity through isolation but in finding dignity through connection. Catherine arrived at Clarence House promptly at 3 o'clock, her bearing reflecting the careful balance between family member and formal royal that characterized her approach to all palace relationships. She was shown directly to Charles's study, where afternoon tea had been prepared with the particular attention to detail that marked important family conferences. Your Majesty, Catherine said as she entered, offering the curtsy that protocol demanded while her expression conveyed warmth that went far beyond mere duty. Please, my dear, sit, Charles replied, gesturing toward the comfortable chairs near the fireplace. I believe we have much to discuss, and I hope you'll forgive an old man for needing to begin with an apology. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise, but she settled into her chair with the composure that had served her well throughout her years in the royal family. An apology, Your Majesty? Charles poured tea for both of them, using the familiar ritual as a way to gather his thoughts. I allowed personal pride to overshadow both my judgment and my responsibilities. Your Christmas event represented everything our family should stand for, and my initial reluctance to participate was unworthy of both the children you were seeking to serve and the principles I claimed to uphold. The acknowledgement hung in the air between them, more significant for its rarity than its content. Royal apologies were precious commodities, carefully rationed and formally structured. For Charles to speak so directly about his own failures represented a level of personal vulnerability that Catherine had rarely witnessed from her father-in-law. Your Majesty, Catherine replied carefully, I hope you know that I never intended to create any family discord. If my approach to organizing the event somehow overstepped appropriate boundaries. Stop, Charles interrupted gently. You did nothing wrong, Catherine. Your approach was exactly what these children needed and deserved. I was the one who allowed other considerations to cloud my understanding of what mattered most. Catherine set down her teacup, her eyes bright with emotion that she was working to keep under careful control. Thank you for saying that, but, more importantly, thank you for coming last evening. When I saw you enter that hall, when I watched you kneel down to speak with Emma and all the other children, I remembered why I was so eager to join this family in the first place. The admission revealed more about Catherine's own recent struggles than any formal briefing could have conveyed. Charles realized that while he had been focused on his own sense of being wronged, Catherine had been questioning her place within the family structure and wondering whether her efforts to modernize royal charitable work had somehow disrupted traditions that were more important than she understood. Tell me about your ideas for future initiatives, Charles said, steering the conversation toward the proposals that Morrison had mentioned. Catherine's expression brightened as she reached for the leather portfolio she had brought with her. I've been thinking about how to build on last evening's success while addressing some of the broader challenges facing vulnerable families throughout the year. Rather than isolated events, what if we developed ongoing programs that provided sustained support? She opened the portfolio to reveal carefully prepared presentations outlining a comprehensive approach to royal charitable work. The proposals included quarterly events focused on different aspects of family need, education support in spring, summer recreation programs, autumn job training initiatives, and winter holiday celebrations. Each program would partner with established charities while leveraging royal involvement to attract additional funding and volunteers. The beauty of this approach, Catherine continued, her enthusiasm evident as she walked through her detailed plans, is that it creates consistent touchpoints throughout the year while allowing us to address different challenges as they arise. We could track individual families over time, providing not just temporary assistance but genuine pathways to improve circumstances. Charles studied the proposals with growing admiration for their thoughtfulness and scope. Catherine had clearly spent considerable time researching best practices in charitable work while developing practical approaches that honored both royal tradition and contemporary social needs. Her ideas represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking he had always hoped to bring to his own royal duties. This is impressive work, Charles said sincerely. Have you discussed these ideas with William? Catherine nodded. He's been wonderfully supportive, but he suggested I speak with you directly since many of these initiatives would benefit from your involvement and experience. He also thought you might have insights from your own charitable work that could strengthen the overall approach. The reference to his decades of charitable involvement reminded Charles of the passion that had driven him throughout his adult life. From the prince's trust to his environmental initiatives, he had always believed that royal privilege carried with it an obligation to create positive change. Catherine's proposals offered an opportunity to build on that foundation while reaching new populations and addressing contemporary challenges. There's one additional element I wanted to discuss, Catherine said, turning to a final section of her presentation. I've been thinking about ways to involve your grandchildren in age-appropriate charitable activities. Not for publicity, but to help them understand from an early age that service to others is both a privilege and a responsibility. The suggestion struck Charles as particularly thoughtful. He had often worried about how to instill proper values in the next generation of royals while protecting their childhood innocence. Catherine's approach offered a way to introduce concepts of service and compassion through positive experiences rather than lectures or obligations. George is old enough now to understand the basics of helping others, Catherine continued. Charlotte and Louis could participate in simpler activities like preparing gift bags or drawing pictures for elderly residents in care homes. Nothing that would create pressure for them, but opportunities to experience the joy that comes from making others happy. Charles found himself thinking about his own childhood memories of accompanying his grandmother to various charitable functions. Those experiences had shaped his understanding of royal duty in ways that no formal education could have achieved. The idea of creating similar formative experiences for his grandchildren filled him with something approaching excitement. "I think this could be transformative," Charles said, his voice carrying genuine enthusiasm for the first time in their conversation. "Not just for the families we would serve, but for our own family's understanding of what it means to be royal in the 21st century." Catherine's smile reflected both relief and anticipation. "I was hoping you would be willing to serve as a senior patron for the overall initiative. Your involvement would provide the kind of gravitas and credibility that these programs need to achieve their full potential." The request represented exactly the kind of meaningful role Charles had been seeking, an opportunity to use his position and experience to create lasting positive change while working collaboratively with the next generation of royals. It also offered a path forward from the recent difficulties, a way to transform family conflict into family partnership. "I would be honored," Charles replied without hesitation. "When shall we begin?" The question marked a turning point not just in their conversation but in the broader family relationships that had been so strained in recent weeks. By choosing to focus on service rather than grievances, they had found a way to heal division while creating something larger and more meaningful than either could have achieved alone. As their afternoon meeting concluded, Charles felt a sense of purpose and optimism that had been absent from his life for longer than he cared to admit. Catherine's vision offered a blueprint for royal relevance that honored tradition while embracing innovation, exactly the balance he had been seeking throughout his reign. The transformation that had begun with a child's drawing of a crown made of Christmas stars was evolving into something that could reshape royal charitable work for generations to come. Sometimes, Charles reflected, the most important royal decisions were the ones that emerged not from grand strategic planning but from simple human moments of connection and understanding. 3 months after the Christmas event that had changed everything, King Charles stood in the same study at Clarence House where he had wrestled with his most difficult decision. The afternoon light streaming through the windows illuminated not anxiety and conflict, but a desk covered with progress reports, thank you letters, and planning documents for the expanded charitable initiatives that had grown from Catherine's original vision. The royal family's new approach to charitable work had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The winter holiday program that had begun with 87 children had evolved into a comprehensive year-round initiative serving over 3,000 families across London and the surrounding counties. What's more, the model was being studied by other royal families across Europe, with several expressing interest in developing similar programs in their own nations. Morrison entered the study carrying the morning correspondence, but his demeanor reflected none of the tension that had characterized their interactions during the previous winter's crisis. Instead, he moved with the satisfied efficiency of someone whose work was producing measurable positive outcomes. "The latest reports from our partner charities are quite remarkable, Your Majesty," Morrison said, setting down a folder of updates. "The Easter Education Initiative reached twice its target enrollment, and the summer recreation programs have waiting lists extending into next year. More significantly, we're seeing evidence of sustained family improvement that goes well beyond the immediate assistance provided." Charles opened the folder, scanning reports that documented not just numbers served but lives genuinely changed. Families who had received educational support were achieving measurably better outcomes for their children. Parents who had participated in job training programs were finding stable employment at rates significantly higher than regional averages. Children who had attended royal events were demonstrating increased confidence and academic performance in their schools. And the family's involvement? Charles asked, referring to the gradual integration of multiple royal family members into the expanded programming. Morrison's smile reflected genuine pride in the collaborative effort that had emerged. Prince William's environmental workshops have been particularly successful with teenage participants. Princess Anne's attendance at the spring education events provided exactly the kind of practical credibility those programs needed. Even the children have exceeded expectations in their contributions. The reference to his grandchildren's participation filled Charles with particular satisfaction. Prince George had proven surprisingly effective at engaging with children his own age during events, while Princess Charlotte's natural empathy had made her a favorite among younger participants. Even little Prince Louis, though still very young, had brought joy to elderly residents during care home visits through his uninhibited enthusiasm and infectious giggles. "There's one additional development that I think will particularly interest Your Majesty," Morrison continued, producing a letter bearing the seal of Buckingham Palace. "This arrived by special courier this morning." Charles opened the letter to find a formal invitation from several European royal families to participate in an international conference on royal charitable work. The invitation specifically cited the British royal family's innovative approach to sustained family support as a model worth sharing and expanding across national boundaries. "They want us to lead a workshop on collaborative royal service," Charles said, his voice reflecting amazement at how dramatically circumstances had changed. 6 months ago, we were struggling to coordinate a single Christmas event. Now they're asking us to teach other royal families how to modernize their charitable approaches. The invitation represented validation of everything Catherine had envisioned and worked to achieve. Her idea of using royal privilege to create genuine, sustained change in people's lives was being recognized as a significant innovation in how monarchies could serve their people in the contemporary world. A gentle knock on the door interrupted Charles's thoughts. Catherine entered, but this time she was not alone. Prince George accompanied her, his 8-year-old face bright with excitement about some news he was clearly eager to share. "Grandfather," George said, his formal address giving way to childish enthusiasm as he approached Charles's desk, "we received letters from some of the children who came to our Easter event, and they want to know if they can help with the summer programs." Catherine smiled at her son's excitement while setting down her own portfolio of materials. "Several of the older children who have participated in our events have asked if they can volunteer to help with activities for younger participants. It seems we've created a cycle of service that's sustaining itself." The development represented something Charles had never dared hope for, not just royal family members serving others, but program participants becoming servants themselves, creating a community of mutual support that extended far beyond anything the royal family alone could have provided. "What kind of help do they want to offer?" Charles asked, genuinely curious about how children who had recently been recipients of charity were now seeking to become donors of service. George consulted a piece of paper he had brought with him, reading carefully from notes he had apparently prepared. "Marcus Thompson wants to teach younger children how to make the ornaments we learned about at Christmas. Emma Richardson and her grandmother want to help organize art activities. And there's a teenage girl named Sarah who learned to read better through our spring program, and now she wants to help teach reading to other children." The specific examples illustrated the transformative power of Catherine's approach to royal charitable work. Rather than creating dependency, the programs were fostering agency and community engagement that would continue to generate positive outcomes long after any individual royal event had ended. "There's something else," Catherine said, her voice carrying a note of excitement that Charles had learned to associate with her most innovative ideas. "The success of our programs has attracted attention from international development organizations. They're interested in adapting our model for use in developing countries where royal families could partner with local leaders to address education and poverty issues on a larger scale." The possibility of expanding their approach beyond Britain's borders represented exactly the kind of meaningful legacy Charles had always hoped his reign might achieve. Instead of simply maintaining existing institutions, they had created something new that could generate positive change across multiple generations and national boundaries. Prince George, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the serious attention he reserved for topics he considered important, raised his hand as if he were in school. "Grandfather, may I ask something?" "Of course, George. What would you like to know?" The young prince's question emerged with the directness that characterized children his age, why didn't we always do things this way? Why did it take so long to figure out how to help people properly? The innocent inquiry struck at the heart of institutional change and royal evolution. Charles considered his response carefully, recognizing that his answer would help shape his grandson's understanding of leadership and service. Sometimes, George, even when people want to help others, they get caught up and worry about doing things the right way instead of focusing on doing the right thing. It took your step-grandmother's fresh thinking to remind us that the most important royal traditions are about serving people, not just following old rules. George nodded with the seriousness of someone processing complex ideas. So Grandmother Catherine helped you remember what being royal really means? Exactly, Charles replied, feeling the profound truth of his grandson's simple summary. She helped all of us remember. As the afternoon meeting continued, they reviewed plans for the upcoming summer programs that would serve as the next major test of their expanded approach. The initiatives would include outdoor education camps for urban children, job training workshops for unemployed parents, and intergenerational programs that brought together elderly community members with young families. The scope and ambition of the programming represented a level of royal charitable involvement that was unprecedented in its comprehensiveness and sustainability. Rather than isolated gestures of royal benevolence, they were creating systems that addressed root causes of social problems while leveraging royal influence to attract resources and attention that multiplied their impact. There is one challenge we need to address, Catherine said as their planning session drew toward a conclusion. The success of our programs is generating more requests for assistance than we can currently handle. We need to think about how to expand our capacity without compromising the quality of service that has made these initiatives so effective. The challenge represented exactly the kind of problem Charles had always hoped to face: too much demand for meaningful royal service rather than too little. It also presented an opportunity to think creatively about how to involve other members of the extended royal family and how to train additional staff members in the collaborative approach that had proven so successful. Perhaps, Charles suggested, this is an opportunity to formalize what we've learned into a training program that could be shared with other charitable organizations. If we can teach our methods to existing charities, we could multiply our impact without requiring direct royal involvement in every program. Catherine's eyes lit up with enthusiasm for the possibility. We could create a Royal Institute for Collaborative Service, something that would provide training, resources, and ongoing support for organizations that want to adopt similar approaches. The idea represented a natural evolution of everything they had accomplished, from resolving family conflict through service to creating sustainable systems that could generate positive change independent of royal family involvement. It would also provide a lasting institutional legacy that could continue to serve people long after current family members had passed on to other roles and responsibilities. As their meeting concluded and Catherine prepared to leave with George, Charles felt a profound sense of gratitude for the transformation that had occurred in his family and his reign. The crisis that had seemed so destructive just months earlier had ultimately created opportunities for growth and innovation that none of them could have imagined. Catherine, Charles said as she gathered her materials, I hope you know how much your persistence and vision have meant to all of us. You refused to let us settle for less than our best selves, even when that refusal created temporary difficulties. Catherine's response carried both humility and quiet pride. Your Majesty, I simply believed that if we could set aside our differences long enough to focus on serving others, we would remember what we all care about most. The rest followed naturally from that beginning. After Catherine and George departed, Charles remained in his study as evening settled over London. The weight of kingship that had felt so burdensome during the previous winter's crisis now seemed more like an opportunity than an obligation. He had learned that the most powerful royal decisions were often the ones that emerged from putting service above self, collaboration above hierarchy, and love above pride. The transformation had begun with a 7-year-old's drawing of a crown made of Christmas stars, but it had evolved into something that would continue to create light and hope for generations to come. Sometimes, Charles reflected with deep satisfaction, the greatest royal legacies were built not through grand gestures but through the patient accumulation of small acts of service and love. Outside his window, London sparkled with the lights of millions of people living their ordinary extraordinary lives, each dealing with their own challenges and celebrating their own small victories. As their king, Charles now felt more connected to those lives than ever before, not through the distant dignity of monarchy but through the shared humanity of service to others. The crisis had ended not with victory or defeat but with transformation of family relationships, of royal purpose, and of the very meaning of what it meant to wear the crown in service to others. And, in that transformation, Charles had found not just peace but genuine joy in the responsibilities he had been born to carry.